More of Sunday's explosive 60 Minutes interview with Ruth and Andrew Madoff. For the first time, they explain what happened to them as their family fell apart, along with a business built on lies. Speaking with Morley Safer, Bernie Madoff's wife and son talked about the day that he confessed to them.
He called from the office and said, "I'm coming home with the boys. I have something to talk about." He came in, we went into a room, 4 of us, and he said, "I have a confession to make. I've been running a Ponzi scheme." He said $50 billion.
He said, "Everything I've been doing is all a big lie." He said the business is a Ponzi scheme, and the firm is completely insolvent, and I'm broke. And then he just started sobbing, and I was shocked. I felt like my head exploded. I mean, I don't think if he had told me he was an alien, I could have been more surprised. He said that the firm had liabilities of $50 billion. It never occurred to me that his business had anything like that anything like that under management. It was shocking.
Your mother, what was her reaction?
She looked shocked. She asked, "What's a Ponzi scheme?" It was her first question. She didn't even understand that. I think it was me who answered and said that it means that it's all fake, that Dad's, he's not been doing what he says he's been doing. And he followed that up and said, "Yes, I've been lying to all of you all of these years. I've been lying to everybody. I've been lying to myself," he said.
2 years after that confession, Mark Madoff committed suicide. Later on in the interview, Morley Safer also asked Ruth Madoff one of the questions many people have wondered about her and her husband.
Why haven't you filed for a divorce from this man?
I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. He's going to die in prison. I certainly don't want to find another man these days.
He'll probably see this interview. Are you concerned about it?
I was thinking about that. No, I'm not concerned. He should hear it.
Joining us now is New York Times senior financial writer Diana Henriques, the first journalist to interview Bernie Madoff in prison.
She is the author of The Wizard of Lies, Bernie Madoff and the Death of Trust, and you have a new article out on this morning on your interviews with Ruth and Andrew Madoff. But you actually heard from Bernie Madoff over the weekend in an email. What did he say to you?
I did. He confirmed Ruth's account of what he called a feeble suicide attempt on that Christmas Eve. He said they undertook it in a state of deep depression. Confirmed the details of it, and then said at the end of the very short note, "Please understand how hard this is for me to admit." And I said, well, that's pure Bernie, because he can't admit failure really at anything, and I think he had resisted telling anyone about the suicide attempt, even kind of brushing off an earlier question I'd asked him, where he said, well, suicide crossed my mind. But finally, when Ruth became public with it, he had to confirm it, but put a spin on it to say, well, it's very hard for me to admit this.
But Ruth said something similar, didn't she? That it was hard for her to admit as well. I mean, I'm sure it was.
In my interview with her, she spoke about it fairly easily. It was in the context of talking about the incredible pressure they were under in those first 2 weeks. You remember the media scrum outside the apartment. She was followed everywhere. There was hate mail. There was anti-Semitic attacks on the internet. It was a horror for a woman really who had spent her whole life as a fairly popular gal.
Yeah. And they were very popular, of course, within their circles and for a lot of philanthropic work they had done. You sat down with her for 3 hours.
Yes.
And you write that she was very down to earth in that interview, that she broke down throughout much of it. That's not exactly the woman that we saw in Morley Safer's interview last night. In fact, I've heard people say anecdotally she didn't come off as very sympathetic. Do you think it was a different side we saw in 60 Minutes?
I was surprised when I saw that segment as well, based on my interview with her. She certainly seemed far more human, far more sad, dignified, but in a way very naive about the world. She's never done television before. She would not be doing this now, but that Andrew asked her to help promote this family biography. she has cultivated her privacy and seclusion for 2.5 years. So certainly this is not her natural medium, and I did not really recognize that Ruth as the woman I had spent more than 3 hours with.
Mm-hmm. More hurtful for her, the fact that Bernie kept this fraud from her for 50 some odd years, or however long it was, or that he kept his infidelities from her, which went on for quite some time as well.
I think that it was sort of a final straw situation. She was stunned that he had lied to everybody else about what he was doing, but I don't think she really understood that. The
affair went on for how long?
Well, Bernie denies that affair at all. The account that was in the memoir said that it was a long flirtation and a brief sexual affair in the mid-90s. But Ruth was devastated by that. It was almost like the infidelities gave her the spine to do what she knew she needed to do to save her family, which was cut Bernie off.
Which is what she has done. They have not spoken since she spoke to him to tell him about the suicide of their son.
Correct.
What about Andrew? Because we see Andrew Madoff in this interview.
Yes.
What was he like with you?
He was far more businesslike. He did not lose his composure at all in the interview that I did with him. He clearly is still immensely angry at his father, but seems to have a great confidence that when people hear his side of the story, that they will believe in his innocence and that they will look at the family differently. I don't know that he's right in that faith, but...
He said at the end of the 60 interview he will never speak to his father again. You believe him on that?
I do. I do. There is still a very deep reservoir of anger.
All right. Great to have you here with us this morning, Diana. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Diana.